Britain was often referred to as the sick man of Europe in the 1970s because the British economy was in a deep recession. Inflation was high, unemployment was high, and economic growth was weak. These problems were caused by a number of factors, and I don't want to keep them secret. There was the 1973 oil crisis, which drove up energy prices. The high union spending was there, which increased the cost of production. And the strong sterling, which made exports more expensive. But there was also a lack of competitiveness of the British industries. These problems led to a series of social and political unrest in the country. The 1970s saw a series of strikes and work stoppages. The government has also been criticized for its inability to stabilize the economy. The 1973 oil crisis was a turning point in the history of the world economy. Oil prices rose by more than 400% as a result of the crisis, which led to a recession in many countries. Great Britain was particularly affected as the economy was heavily dependent on oil imports. And as I said, the heavy union spending was another factor contributing to the stagnation of the British economy. In the 1970s, the unions in Great Britain were strong and were able to push through high wage increases. And this led to a deterioration in the competitiveness of the British industry. And as I said, the strong pound sterling was another factor that hurt exports. In the 1970s, sterling was grossly overvalued against other major currencies, and this made British exports more expensive and made it difficult for companies to compete abroad. And the lack of competitiveness of British industry was indeed another reason for the stagnation of the economy. In the 1970s, many British businesses were outdated and inefficient. They could not keep up with the foreign competitors who used new technologies and methods. The troubles of the British economy in the 1970s led to a series of social and political turmoils. The 1970s saw a series of strike and work stoppages, as I said, and the government was not really helping at that time. But what could they do? Well, in the 1980s, the British economy began to recover, but this was partly due to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's economic reforms, which weakened unions and liberalized markets. And the British economy has developed steadily since then, but the troubles of the 1970s have left their mark. The UK is still an industrialized nation, but the economy is less competitive than the other major industrialized nations compared to that time. And the UK's entry into the European Economic Community has helped the UK economy recover. The EEC has facilitated trade between member states, which has led to an increase in UK exports and imports. And this in turn has led to an increase in economic growth and employment. In addition, what we call the EWG has supported the UK economy by providing funding and technical assistance, and this support has helped the UK economy become more competitive and efficient. Overall, the UK's entry into the EEC has helped the UK economy recover to still being one of the strongest economies in the world. The UK's process of joining the EEC began in 1961 when the UK government applied to join. However, the application was initially rejected by France. France was concerned about the UK's economic and political power. Only in 1973 did France agree to the accession of the United Kingdom, or accession. France blocked the UK's accession to the European Economic Community on several occasions, in 63 and in 67, for example, and the main reason for the French blockades was concern about the UK's economic and political power. France feared that the UK would dominate the EEC and that this would result in a loss of French sovereignty. Ever heard of that? There are many reasons why France blocked Britain's entry into the EEC, not only the one I said. What I already said was the concern for the economic power of the UK, even still as the sick man of Europe, but France feared that the UK would dominate the EEC. And there was also concern for the UK political power. France feared that the UK would kind of tailor EEC policy to its own interests. And there was concern about the different cultural and political orientation of the two countries. France and the United Kingdom have different historical, cultural and political traditions, and France feared that this would lead to conflicts within the EEC. And there was also the personal rivalry between Charles de Gaulle and Harold Macmillan. Charles de Gaulle was the French president from 1959 to 1969. Harold Macmillan was the British Prime Minister from 1957 to 1963. De Gaulle and Macmillan had a personal rivalry which also affected the issue of Britain joining the EEC. The French blockades were very successful in preventing British entry into the EEC. As I said, the UK was only able to join the EEC in 1973 after France lifted its blockade. And French resistance to British entry into the EEC had a major impact on the development of the European Union. It helped the EEC become a more federal union, with member states having to cede more power to what we call it today, the EU. The accession process was long and difficult, and there was much discussion and negotiation on the terms of accession. Among other things, the United Kingdom had to commit itself to opening up the internal market and supporting the European Monetary Union. And despite the challenges, the negotiating partners managed to negotiate an accession treaty that was acceptable to both sides. The UK's entry into the EEC was a significant event in the country's history. It had a major impact on British economy, on politics and society. And there were some implications of the UK joining. Accession has led to an increase in trade between the UK and the other, what now are EU countries. Accession has resulted in an increase in economic growth and employment in the UK and ended the segment of Europe stuff. Accession has helped the UK economy become more competitive and efficient. And accession has helped British politics and society become a little bit more European. The UK's entry into the EEC was an important step in the country's history. It has helped the UK become a richer, stronger and more influential country. And a first referendum on membership was held for the first time in 1975. The 1975 British referendum was held to clarify public opinion on the United Kingdom's entry into the European Economic Community. The UK has, as you know, joined the EEC in 1973, but there was strong popular opposition to membership in the UK. The Labour Party, which came to power in 1974, had campaigned to hold a referendum on EEC membership. The referendum took place on June 5th in 1975, and the question was, should the UK remain in the European community? 67.2% of voters voted to stay, 32.8% voted to leave. And the result of the referendum with this was a clear majority to remain in the EEC. And the referendum had a major impact on British politics and the development of the European Union. It showed that the British people at the time supported membership of the EEC and that the EEC had become a permanent institution that could no longer be easily abandoned, even if they decided to exactly do this several decades later. But this part of history is often forgotten by the Brexiteers because the state the UK was in before they joined what today is the EU. And they wouldn't be where they were when they left the EU without joining it. And we see the same in other countries that joined the EU. Ireland is a very good example. They were not so well off when they joined the EU. They passed all the tests, so to speak. But nowadays, they are a thriving economy. And that has a lot to do with their membership in the EU. But some people obviously then thought they can ignore all of this. But if you want to know more about Brexit or UK politics, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.